At the end of August 2023, China unveiled a map that caused shockwaves across Asia. But why? On this new map, Beijing has redrawn its borders to claim territories belonging to India, Bhutan, Vietnam, and several other nations, extending its reach across the continent. Some of these claims are well known, like Taiwan and the South China Sea Islands. But on this map, China goes even further, eyeing regions that include parts of Russia and disputed land along the 400-kilometer frontier with India. The stakes here are dangerously high. Two nuclear powers, two of the world's most populous nations, standing eye to eye across one of the world's most rugged borders. The relationship between these giants isn't just tense, it's complicated by the unforgiving geography that has kept them apart for centuries, but now threatens to pull them into conflict. Why would these two powerful nations risk everything for pieces of land high up in the Himalayas? And what's really at stake as they push their borders to the brink of confrontation? Let's explore how the mountains, rivers, and plains of the Indian-Chinese border have set the stage for one of the most heated and perilous territorial disputes on Earth. The story of this conflict starts with a clash of territorial claims. On China's 2023 map, they lay claim to areas that, under international law, belong to India and other neighboring countries. The biggest flashpoints are in two key areas along the Indian border. Arunachal Pradesh in the east, a state recognized globally as part of India, but referred to by China as South Tibet, and Aksai Chin in the west, a high-altitude desert that China controls but India claims. These regions aren't just minor slivers of land. They're enormous territories populated by millions and strategically vital. Across this rugged frontier, tens of thousands of troops on both sides live in hostile conditions. Thin air, freezing winters, and dangerous terrain to defend their nation's claims. The boundary separating them isn't a legally defined border, but a line of actual control, LAC, a temporary line where each side asserts control until a final border can be agreed upon. But this line is more than just a marker, it's a constant source of tension and misunderstanding, one where the smallest shift can have massive consequences. When a country releases a map asserting ownership of lands it doesn't control, it's more than a political gesture, it's a direct challenge to its neighbor. And in this case, China's map is a message to India that it views these contested lands as non-negotiable. For India, it's a call to action, a reminder that defending its borders is a fight for sovereignty and survival. The disputed regions stretch across three key areas: Aksai Chin in the northwest, a small section in the central zone, and the expansive region of Arunachal Pradesh in the east. Each area tells its own story, each battle its own purpose. Aksai Chin is a remote, high-altitude desert, largely uninhabited, but of enormous strategic importance. It provides a land bridge between Tibet and China's Xinjiang region. China has been in control here since a decisive 1962 war with India, and they're not willing to let go. In the central zone, smaller stretches of land remain disputed, but less frequently publicized. However, it's in Arunachal Pradesh, also known as South Tibet to the Chinese, where stakes are highest. This area is populated and politically significant, home to over 1 million people under Indian administration. But to China, it's a region of cultural and historical significance, a legacy of the disputed McMahon Line that divides the two nations. Now, there's a third player in this game, Bhutan. Bhutan, the peaceful Himalayan kingdom, has found itself wedged in this standoff, and China's creeping expansion into Bhutanese territory makes the stakes even higher for India. Over the years, China has moved into areas within Bhutan that were previously off limits, creating new settlements and strengthening its strategic presence. For India, Bhutan is more than just a friendly neighbor, it's a buffer. Bhutan's territory sits right next to India's vulnerable Siliguri corridor, the narrow strip of land connecting India to its northeastern states. If China extends its control further into Bhutan, it's not just a territorial threat, it's a strategic nightmare for India, risking the isolation of its entire northeastern region. The seeds of this tension were planted long before modern India and China existed, going back to colonial border arrangements by the British in India and treaties involving Tibet. In the 19th century, the British proposed different boundaries for India and Tibet, but these were never fully agreed upon by China, which considered Tibet its vassal state. Then there's the infamous McMahon Line, drawn up by British officials in 1914 to mark the border between British India and Tibet. China never accepted it, but when India gained independence in 1947, it claimed the territories up to this line as its own. China, meanwhile, sees this as an unequal treaty forced upon it, adding another layer of resentment and complexity to this bitter dispute. As colonial rule ended, both nations inherited their predecessors' unresolved border disputes, each adopting different interpretations. When China took control of Tibet in 1950, it immediately reinforced its stance on these boundaries, seeing India's influence in the region as a threat to its own stability. Geography doesn't just separate India and China, it dictates their ambitions. The Tibetan Plateau, sometimes called the Water Tower of Asia, holds the headwaters of the continent's mightiest rivers, the Yellow, the Yangtze, the Brahmaputra. These rivers support billions of people across China, India, Pakistan, and beyond. Controlling Tibet means controlling these vital water sources, and neither country is willing to cede this advantage. For China, the water security of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers is non-negotiable, fueling its commitment to keep Tibet within its fold and prevent Indian influence from gaining ground. This concern is more than just theoretical. It's an existential issue that drives Beijing's aggressive stance on Tibetan territory. Along the line of actual control, the Himalayan mountains create a natural fortress. But this mountainous barrier also makes it difficult for either side to hold the upper hand for long. The heights and valleys don't just make movement challenging. They amplify the strategic value of every inch of territory. In this high-stakes arena, even the smallest tactical advantage, a better overlook point or control over a narrow pass, could mean the difference between security and vulnerability. Consider the Siliguri corridor in northeastern India. This 24-kilometer-wide strip, known as the Chicken's Neck, is India's only land link to its 7 northeastern states. Control over the corridor is crucial to keeping India connected. Losing it would isolate 50 million people in the northeast and cut off a critical pathway for Indian reinforcements. This dispute has already seen bloodshed, and the scars of the 1962 Sino-Indian War still linger. Thousands died and China emerged victorious, pushing its line of control further south. Though both sides retreated afterward, the tension never truly faded. Fast forward to the 2010s and 2020s, and the border has once again become a flashpoint. Military standoffs in 2017 and 2020 have led to hand-to-hand combat between troops, sometimes with crude weapons like clubs wrapped in barbed wire. These encounters feel medieval, but show the desperation on both sides to defend their perceived territories. In a region where firearms are banned, these brutal melees have led to casualties and fueled nationalist fervor in both countries. As China rises economically, its ambitions grow alongside. The Belt and Road Initiative is transforming its relationships across Asia, with 6 of India's 7 neighboring countries participating. India, however, resists, feeling increasingly surrounded by China's expanding influence. On the other hand, India has forged closer ties with the United States, Japan, and Australia through the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad. The Quad is seen as a direct counter to China's power in the region. For Beijing, these alliances are cause for concern, especially as India gains a foothold in critical areas like the Indian Ocean. Both nations see themselves as regional leaders, and neither is willing to back down. The pressure is mounting, and each new diplomatic or military move feels like it brings them one step closer to a dangerous tipping point. The worst-case scenario for India? A two-front war with China on one side and Pakistan on the other. Both of these nuclear-armed neighbors claim Indian-administered regions, totaling an area almost the size of Washington state in the U.S. India has to prepare for the possibility of defending itself on multiple fronts, a situation that would stretch its military resources thin and challenge its national unity. For China, the nightmare lies in a different two-front war, defending its interests in the Himalayas while also facing potential conflict over Taiwan in the east. The stakes here aren't just national boundaries. They are the survival of each nation's strategic interests. And with nuclear arms in the picture, the cost of miscalculation could be catastrophic. The geography that once kept India and China apart is now drawing them closer to conflict. As they navigate their historical grievances and modern ambitions, Each country is forced to weigh the cost of territorial concessions against the risk of full-scale war. Both nations are armed, both are determined, and both see their positions as non-negotiable. What will happen next? Only time will tell if diplomacy can prevail over distrust or if the mountains will echo with the sounds of another clash. But one thing is certain, the world cannot afford to look away. If this story of tension and high-stakes geography between India and China fascinated you, remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into today's most pressing global issues.